What would you do if the only way to protect the truth was to risk everything: your career, your reputation, even the fragile trust of the man who could decide your fate? Eva Whitmore was no more than a secretary in a towering glass empire, the kind of woman most people overlooked. Yet, on one glittering gala night, she silenced the microphone and stopped a lie that could have ruined an innocent man. That single act hurled her into a storm of scandal, betrayal, and suspicion. At her side stood Cole Harrington, a billionaire forged by loss, a man who believed in numbers more than people until Eva forced him to see differently. Together, they would face boardroom politics, whispered betrayals, and a public fall from grace. And yet, in the cracks of distrust, something unexpected began to grow: courage, healing, and a love strong enough to withstand doubt. But can two broken souls truly rebuild trust in a world built on power and appearances? Or will the same stage that humiliated them become the place of their greatest redemption? Stay with us as we uncover their journey. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this story is one you won't want to miss. Have you ever watched someone risk everything just to protect the truth, even if it could cost their job? The Franklin Ballroom glowed like a jewel box that night. Chandeliers spilled light over polished marble, and rows of crystal glasses stood like soldiers on linen-draped tables. The air carried the faint bite of lemon polish, the sweetness of roses, and the sharper scent of champagne freshly poured. Philadelphia's wealthiest men and women gathered in sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos, ready to applaud another grand pledge from the Harrington Foundation. Eva Whitmore stood off stage, close enough to feel the heat of the spotlights, far enough to remain invisible. At 35, she knew her role well: an executive secretary, invisible hands behind Cole Harrington's empire. She had checked the teleprompter twice, stacked cue cards with the neatness of someone who never left ink stains on a page. Yet tonight, her hands trembled, and a tiny smudge of blue ink darkened her thumb. Across the stage, Madison Pierce glided forward. At 42, still breathtaking in crimson silk, she wore her ambition like perfume, thick, cloying, impossible to ignore. The room hushed as the screen lit up behind her. Numbers rolled across it, figures of supposed theft, missing funds, a story of betrayal pinned on a single man. The image froze on the face of an elderly janitor, someone Eva knew by sight if not by name. He had mopped these hallways long before she arrived. She remembered the stoop of his shoulders, the slow care with which he buffed the marble floors. Madison's voice cut through the silence, smooth as glass. "This is where our charity has been failing. Funds diverted, trust broken." The audience shifted, a few gasps, a few satisfied nods. The cameras swiveled. Eva's pulse hammered in her ears. She glanced at the prompter feed. The numbers were wrong. Not just wrong, they were twisted, cut from a different report. She had seen the real budget sheets late at night when Cole was out of town, when she alone sat in the office balancing receipts against invoices. The janitor was no thief. The truth was different, harsher saint. Bridget's community clinic had suffered budget cuts so deep that veterans waited months for treatment. One had died last winter, shivering in a basement apartment, waiting for medication that never came. Her fingers tightened around the control pad. She felt the sweat at the base of her neck, the sting of conscience pressing against her ribs. She thought of her own mother, frail and living on a nurse's thin patience. If someone lied about her, would anyone stand up? Madison's words grew sharper. "Tonight, we show accountability." Eva acted. She pressed the mute key. The microphone cut with a pop, leaving the room in startled silence. Gasps rose. The screen still glowed, but the voice was gone. And then Eva stepped forward. She wasn't meant to be seen. Secretaries belonged to shadows, yet her feet carried her into the light. She caught the scent of her own perfume, faint lavender clinging to a dress she had worn 3 years running. Hymn let out once already. Her knees threatened to give, but her voice, though trembling, found air. "These numbers are false." A ripple surged through the ballroom. Heads turned. 1,000 eyes pinned her, uninvited, unprotected. Eva swallowed. I handle reports. I know what is real. The truth is not theft by an old man who polishes our floors. The truth is that St. Bridget's clinic lost its funding. A veteran died waiting for insulin. That is what those numbers mean. The silence was heavy, like a storm refusing to break. Cole Harrington rose halfway from his chair, face taut with disbelief. He had expected a polished presentation, applause, not his secretary under the lights dismantling the narrative. His jaw tightened, yet he didn't speak. The cameras caught everything: the stunned look of donors, the frown tightening his brow, the way Madison's smile froze like a mask about to crack. Eva held the mic closer. She could feel the metal warm against her palm. We cannot humiliate a working man to cover mistakes of power. Not tonight, not ever. It was reckless. She knew it. Her career, her paycheck, her mother's rent, every piece of her stability trembled in that single breath. Yet she also knew the weight of silence. Silence would mean complicity. The janitor stood at the edge of the crowd, mop handle still in hand, as if he had wandered in from another world. His eyes glistened under the harsh light. No words left him, only a shake of the head, slow and disbelieving. Gasps shifted into murmurs, murmurs into the clicking frenzy of press cameras. Madison tried to recover, lips curving, voice dripping sugar, emotions. Nothing more. We'll review. But the damage was done. The gala had turned. What should have been a night of triumph now hung in jagged silence. The billionaire who controlled the stage had been upstaged by his own secretary, and the city's elite had witnessed it firsthand. Eva lowered the mic. Her chest ached from holding air too long. She wanted to run, to vanish into the folds of velvet curtains. Yet her shoes stayed planted, as though roots had grown in marble. Cole's eyes found hers across the stage, gray, unblinking, unreadable. There was no gratitude there, no immediate wrath either, only the deep stillness of a man calculating 100 consequences at once. For Eva, that look was enough. She knew tomorrow would come with summons, explanations, perhaps dismissal, but tonight, at least, she had said what had to be said. The applause never came, only the restless shuffle of expensive shoes, the soft clatter of glasses being set too hard on linen, the sharp buzz of phones as headlines began to form. Eva exhaled slowly, as though letting go of her last defense. Somewhere in the crowd. The janitor bowed his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. That was enough. The gala moved on, hollow and fractured, but Eva's night had already ended. Tomorrow's storm would rise, and she would walk straight into it. Behind every public mistake sits a private life, heavy with reasons no one else can see. For Eva Whitmore, the weight of her choices had been building long before the Franklin Ballroom. It lived in the small apartment she returned to each night, on the edge of Scranton's worn streets where houses leaned into one another like tired neighbors. Her mother's voice often called from the back bedroom, softer now, broken by Parkinson's tremors. The kettle on the counter hissed as water rolled to a boil. Eva's old steel thermos sat nearby, its paint chipped, handle taped twice over. She filled it with coffee, the bitter kind sold in bulk cans, thick and dark enough to carry her through double shifts. That thermos had been her companion since her 20s, back when she juggled night classes, clerical work, and her mother's slow decline. In those years, she had learned the rhythm of sacrifice. She could hear her own footsteps echoing in empty corridors of the clinic where she filed patient records. She remembered balancing textbooks on her knees while waiting for her mother's prescriptions, watching the fluorescent lights flicker above worn tile floors. The smell of disinfectant lingered in her memory, sharp, clean, but also hollow. It was the smell of both safety and loss. Eva's life was stitched together by small acts ironing blouses until the seams gave out, cutting coupons, standing in pharmacy lines. Each act left her tired, yet determined. She promised herself she would never look away when truth asked to be spoken. Miles away, in Pittsburgh, another story had been shaping itself years before. Cole Harrington had grown up in the shadow of steel mills. His father, broad-shouldered and soot-stained, had carried the family with long shifts at the furnace. The clang of metal, the hiss of molten iron, the acrid tang of smoke. It was the language of Cole's childhood. But industry had its price. By the time Cole was a teenager, his father's cough rattled through nights, growing sharper until it tore at every breath. There were no luxury clinics for men like him, only overcrowded waiting rooms and prescriptions that came too late. One winter morning, his father never rose again. Cole never forgot the silence that followed the absence of the kettle whistling, the absence of boots thudding against the porch. That silence forged something in him. He would not simply inherit wealth, he would build it around a mission. Devices that eased breathing, machines that caught diseases earlier, outreach programs that placed medicine into the hands of the overlooked. Harrington Biosystems grew out of that vow, and with it, the Harrington Foundation, his attempt to honor what his father had lost. On the surface, Eva and Cole belonged to separate universes. She carried discount groceries up narrow staircases. He rode elevators of glass towers, his suits tailored and pressed. She knew the sound of laundromats at midnight. He knew the hush of private jets cutting through clouds. Yet beneath the surface, both carried a longing for meaning that could not be bought. Both had roots in ordinary pain, a sick parent, a life cut short, the ache of watching dignity erode under illness. That night, after the Gala fractured under Eva's defiance, Cole sat alone in his office above Philadelphia's skyline. The ballroom's glitter had faded into headlines already rushing online. He poured himself a glass of water, no ice, and let it rest untouched on his desk. The reports lay before him, Madison's presentation, Eva's interruption. For years, Cole had trusted numbers on screens. But tonight, he replayed Eva's words in his head. A veteran died, waiting for insulin. Her voice had not been rehearsed. It cracked at the edges, carried raw truth he could not dismiss. He opened the secure files himself, scrolling through spreadsheets, invoices, receipts. The late-night numbers matched her claim. Saint, Bridget's had indeed lost critical funding. The death certificate of a veteran confirmed what she said. Madison's slides had been edited, intentionally or not. Cole leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Humiliation still burned. His authority had been undercut in front of donors. Yet beneath the sting was something else. Respect, reluctant, but real, for a woman who had risked her position for a truth she could have ignored. Meanwhile, Eva sat at her small kitchen table, thermos beside her, hands wrapped around the chipped ceramic mug she had owned for a decade. The hum of her mother's oxygen machine filled the apartment, steady, faithful, a reminder of why she worked so hard. She had no illusions about what tomorrow would bring. Secretaries did not survive public defiance. Still, her chest carried a fragile calm. She had spoken for the janitor, for the veteran who never saw another sunrise, for every silent figure buried under statistics. Her phone buzzed against the table. The screen glowed with a message from Cole's assistant. Short, formal. "You are required at tomorrow morning's board meeting." Eva set the phone down slowly, breathing in the faint scent of brewed coffee, the mix of hope and dread tangling in her chest. Tomorrow, the storm would arrive. What if the man you embarrassed last night now holds the key to your future? The next morning, Eva Whitmore's reflection looked nothing like the calm professional she wished to project. Her eyes were swollen from little sleep, her blouse freshly ironed but wrinkled at the cuffs from nervous fingers. She fastened a silver pin to her collar, the one piece of jewelry she allowed herself. It had been her grandmother's, a reminder that dignity was not defined by wealth. By the time she reached the Harrington Biosystems Tower, the city was still damp with early fog. Glass walls rose into gray skies, swallowing her small figure in mirrored steel. Inside, the lobby gleamed under fluorescent light. Its air scented faintly with disinfectant and coffee brewing from a corner kiosk. She passed security, her badge trembling in her hand, and stepped into the elevator. Floor 38, the boardroom. The corridor felt colder than usual. Carpet muted her footsteps, yet the silence pressed against her like a verdict waiting to fall. She tightened her grip on the portfolio she had thrown together at dawn printouts, handwritten notes, anything to show she had not acted recklessly. The boardroom door opened with a soft click. Inside, the long table gleamed under recessed lights. Dark leather chairs lined both sides, filled with directors in charcoal suits and crisp blouses. Folders lay stacked, water glasses untouched. At the far end sat Cole Harrington. He wore a navy suit, tie knotted perfectly, gray eyes unreadable. He did not gesture for her to sit until the whispers had quieted. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice was low, steady. "Explain." Her throat was dry. She reached for the glass of water before her, the cool rim grounding her as she spoke. "The numbers presented last night were wrong. I reviewed the files myself. They were lifted from a risk projection, not the actual budget. They were meant to illustrate worst-case scenarios, not real theft." A murmur spread along the table. One director adjusted his glasses. Another tapped a pen. Eva continued, forcing her voice steady. "The janitor accused had no access to financial systems. The only fingerprints on those edits came from internal accounts. Specifically, the ones tied to Mr. Caldwell in finance and Ms. Pierce in public relations." The names hung heavy in the air. Cole's gaze sharpened, though his face betrayed nothing. "You are accusing senior staff of falsifying reports." Eva clasped her hands on the table, nails digging into her palms. "I am saying the data was altered, whether intentional or careless. I cannot know, but I know the truth cost a veteran his life at St. Bridget's. I could not stay silent while another man was destroyed to hide it." The room fell still. The hum of the ventilation filled the pause, louder than any voice. Cole leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You disrupted a gala. You embarrassed this organization in front of donors. Every headline this morning paints us as fractured. Do you understand the scale of what you've done?" "Yes," Eva whispered, though her chest felt hollow. "But lies would have done worse." For a moment, she thought he would end it there. Dismiss her. Strip her badge. Escort her out. She saw her mother's medicine bottles in her mind, saw the unpaid bills waiting on her kitchen counter. Her hands trembled against the wood of the table. Then Cole exhaled slowly. His tone shifted, cool but not final. 72 hours. That is what you have. If you believe the narrative is false, you will prepare a replacement, a proposal based on verified field data, not speculation. Something I can present to donors that restores trust. Eva blinked. Relief did not come. Instead, her stomach tightened with fresh weight. 72 hours, she repeated, voice nearly cracking. Yes. Cole's eyes locked on hers, sharp as glass. 3 days, prove your claim, or accept the consequences. The directors exchanged looks, some skeptical, some curious. None dared to challenge him aloud. Cole gathered the papers before him, signaling the meeting's end. Dismissed. Eva rose, her legs unsteady. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold glow washing the room in pallor. She caught the faint smell of paper ink, sharp and dry, like dust pressed into permanence. Walking out, she felt the weight of stares following her. Not admiration, not sympathy, only the fascination people reserve for someone walking a tightrope over fire. In the hallway, she pressed a hand against the cool glass wall, steadying herself. Outside, the city moved on, cars streaming, horns blaring, life indifferent to her private storm. She had not been fired. But neither had she been spared. She had been given a chance and a deadline sharp enough to cut. Eva tightened her grip on her portfolio, pulse racing. 3 days to gather truth, to turn grief into numbers, to build a case strong enough to stand against those who had twisted the data. Her phone vibrated again in her bag. Another message from Cole's assistant. You will coordinate with my office. All resources will be logged. No excuses. Eva exhaled, long and unsteady. Opportunity and danger now walked hand in hand. The boardroom door clicked shut behind her, but its echo followed her all the way down the corridor. Sometimes the coldest places are not outside in winter, but inside glass towers. The headquarters of Harrington Biosystems loomed like a cathedral of commerce. Glass walls caught the morning sun, reflecting it back in hard fragments that blinded more than they welcomed. Inside, the lobby stretched upward in sterile grandeur. White marble, steel rails, and the faint, sharp scent of disinfectant created an atmosphere both pristine and merciless. Eva Whitmore walked across the polished stone floor, her heels clicking too loudly in the silence. She felt the eyes of staff as she passed the whispers, the quick glances, the secretary who cut the mic. She could almost hear the words chasing her down the hallways. Her badge beeped against the scanner, and the elevator doors opened. Inside, the air was cold from overworked air conditioning. She hugged her folder to her chest, steadying herself against the mirrored wall. Her own reflection looked like that of a stranger, jaw tight, shoulders squared, eyes braced for judgment. On the 20th floor, the elevator opened to a hush that felt rehearsed. Open-plan desks stretched in precise rows. Screens flickered with numbers and projections. The smell of toner from freshly printed reports hung faintly in the air. Conversations dipped the moment she stepped out. And then she saw him, Trent Caldwell, once a man she had loved enough to trust with her dreams. Now the CFO whose hands were all over the altered reports. He stood at the end of the corridor, gray suit immaculate, smile sharp. For a second, Scranton came rushing back the nights she had shown him sketches for a mobile health clinic. An old bus converted into a roving doctor's office. He had praised the idea, called it visionary, then later pitched it as his own in another firm. The wound throbbed anew. Trent's smile widened. "Eva, quite the entrance you made at the Gala." She didn't answer. Her shoes clicked past him, each step an effort not to shatter. His chuckle followed like an echo. By noon, Eva had escaped the glass tower and found herself at St. Bridget's Community Clinic. The air here was different, not cold, not polished, just tired. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. The chairs were worn, the tile cracked. Yet here, people waited with quiet hope, clutching folders of test results and plastic pill bottles. Eva took out her notepad. She wasn't a doctor, but she could listen. She asked patients about their wait times, about transportation, about what services they wish they had closer to home. She jotted every detail: the elderly woman who said the bus route was too long, the single father who worked double shifts and couldn't afford time off for checkups, the veteran who said the nearest specialist was 2 hours away. She moved to the nurse's station. Nora Bell, head nurse, recognized her from past visits with Cole's staff. Nora's uniform smelled faintly of bleach, and her eyes were lined with exhaustion, but her voice carried quiet authority. "Eva, these halls don't need more posters or promises. We need capacity, beds, supplies, transport. We spend half our budget patching leaks in the roof." Eva scribbled furiously, the pen scratching across paper. She asked about costs, about overtime hours, about the backlog of patients. She gathered numbers the way others gathered stones for defense. By late afternoon, she sat in the break room, sipping from a paper cup of weak coffee. Her notes filled pages. She stared at them, letting patterns rise. The truth came slowly, like an image forming in fog. Building new facilities cost millions. Clinics required constant staff, but buses retrofit. Buses could move. They could bring doctors into neighborhoods where patients lived. They could carry supplies to those stranded by distance. Capital expenses shifted from walls of brick to wheels of steel. Efficiency sharpened not by expansion, but by mobility. Her pen circled the word bus 3 times. It was more than an idea now. It was a seed. Eva leaned back, exhausted yet alive with urgency. Her blouse smelled faintly of disinfectant, and her hair carried the must of a long day indoors. But her heart pounded with purpose. The clock above the nurse's station ticked toward 6. Outside, The sky deepened to gray, streetlights flickering on. She packed her notes, folded her hands around them as if shielding a fragile flame from wind. The strategy meeting loomed tomorrow. She knew the board would be filled with sharp eyes, sharper tongues, but she also knew silence was no longer an option. Her heels clicked again as she left the clinic, stepping into the cool evening air. The city moved with its usual indifference, but Eva felt the ground beneath her shift. She was no longer just a secretary. She was carrying a plan that might change everything if only she found the courage to speak. Would you speak up if a room full of power quietly hoped you would fail? The strategy meeting began in the upper boardroom, a glass chamber suspended above Philadelphia's skyline. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching dust motes that seemed out of place in so sterile a space. The table stretched long, polished to a mirrored shine. Leather chairs creaked as directors settled, their expressions as stiff as their tailored suits. Eva Whitmore sat near the far end, a single folder before her. She felt small under the fluorescent lights, throat dry, pulse climbing. Around her, conversations hummed finance projections, cost-cutting, donor relations, words layered like a wall to keep her outside. Madison Pierce commanded the opening, her crimson nails tapping lightly on her presentation notes. "We must protect our margins," she declared. "The responsible choice is to consolidate close underperforming clinics, redirect patients to our flagship facilities. That ensures efficiency." Several heads nodded. A few pens scratched approval onto legal pads. The atmosphere tilted in her favor before Eva had spoken a word. Cole Harrington sat at the head of the table, silent, gray eyes scanning every speaker. He wore calm like armor, unmoving, but Eva knew he heard every nuance. When her turn came, Eva rose slowly. The leather chair groaned behind her, the sound startling in the hush. She smoothed her notes, feeling the faint tack of ink still drying on her handwritten margins. "With respect," she began, her voice softer than intended. "Closing clinics may save money on paper, but it raises costs where it matters most on lives. When patients delay care, they end up in emergency rooms. That bill is larger, both in dollars and in dignity." The room stilled. She took a breath, steadier now. "I propose we redirect capital toward a mobile health fleet, retrofitted buses, each equipped with exam rooms, basic diagnostics, and pharmacy supply. They bring care to neighborhoods where patients live, lower fixed costs, broader coverage, and we can prioritize our veterans and our elderly, who are most at risk." A director frowned. "Buses? That sounds like charity stunts." Eva met his gaze. "Not stunts, logistics. One bus, staffed with 2 nurses and a physician, can serve over 200 patients a week. Compare that to building a new clinic at $20 million and a 5-year timeline. Mobility gives us flexibility and trust." She flipped a page. Her graphs were simple, hand-drawn but clear, circles showing reduced overhead, arrows pointing to increased patient reach, numbers translated into stories. This isn't theory. Other cities have piloted similar models with success. Philadelphia can too. Madison's laugh cut sharp. "A secretary lecturing us on healthcare logistics? This is theater, not strategy." Heat rose to Eva's cheeks, but she held steady. "I'm not a doctor, I'm not a financier, but I spent the last 48 hours at St. Bridget's. I spoke with patients, with nurses, with families choosing between groceries and prescriptions. The mobile fleet is not about prestige, it's about people." Silence spread again, heavier this time. Cole leaned forward, fingers drumming once on the table. His gaze locked on Eva, unreadable but unwavering. Then he spoke. 7 days. A pilot program. His words dropped like stones into water, rippling through the room. 1 bus. Limited scope. Miss Whitmore will coordinate. At the end of the week, we'll evaluate performance. Gasps rippled. A director shifted uncomfortably. Madison's smile froze, brittle as glass. Eva's breath caught. She had expected dismissal, maybe ridicule, not this, not authority placed in her hands. Cole's voice continued. Even, final, we do not debate further. The pilot begins tomorrow. The meeting adjourned in murmurs, chairs scraping, papers shuffling. Eva gathered her notes with trembling fingers. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She could feel Madison's stare slicing across the table, sharp with warning. As she stepped into the corridor, the glass walls seemed taller, colder. Outside, the city spread in gray haze, indifferent to her small figure. Yet, inside her, something had shifted. She was no longer only defending truth. She was carrying responsibility. 7 days, 1 bus, 1 chance. She walked toward the elevators, her folder clutched tight against her chest. The hum of the building followed her, the whir of vents, the echo of shoes on marble. Every sound reminded her she had crossed the line from observer to actor. The battlefield had opened. Trust doesn't start in boardrooms. It quietly grows over coffee and ordinary food. The diner sat on a quiet corner where neon lights hummed against the dark, its windows fogged from steam, its linoleum floor worn smooth by decades of footsteps. It was the kind of place where night shift workers sat side by side with students, where the smell of fried onions lingered no matter the hour. Cole Harrington slid into a booth, the vinyl seat sighing under his weight. His navy suit looked out of place against cracked formica tables. Yet he seemed oddly at ease. He loosened his tie, set his phone face down, and ordered black coffee without glancing at the menu. Moments later, Eva arrived, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, her blouse creased from the day. She hesitated at the door, scanning the booths until her eyes found him. Something about the sight this billionaire in a diner past midnight made her smile despite herself. She joined him, sliding opposite, the smell of brewed coffee wrapping around them. A waitress with tired eyes poured 2 mugs, then left a laminated menu sticky at the corners. Cole looked up. Meatloaf here is better than most, 5-star plates. Eva arched a brow. I'll believe it when I taste it. They shared the plate when it came, thick slices covered in brown gravy, mashed potatoes pooling butter. She cut a small bite, tasted, then laughed softly. You're right. It's honest food. He nodded. Sometimes that's all a man needs. The conversation moved slowly, unhurried, like the rhythm of the ceiling fan circling above. They talked about nothing large, her mother's fondness for peach pie, his dislike of overpriced wine. They spoke of early mornings, of the smell of ironed cotton shirts, of the relief of old shoes that finally fit. For Eva, the walls she carried began to ease. She saw not a CEO, but a man who ate meatloaf with the same patience as anyone. For Cole, the distance between them shrank with each refill of coffee, each small smile that crossed her face. Later that night, Eva returned to her apartment. She moved quietly, careful not to wake her mother, though the oxygen machine hummed steadily in the bedroom. She pulled fresh sheets from the closet, soft cotton worn thin from years of use, and changed the bedding with practiced hands. The scent of laundry detergent, faint but comforting, filled the room. She smoothed the fabric, tucked the corners, then kissed her mother's forehead. These small acts were her world, caring, unseen, steady. At the same hour, Cole stood in a cemetery on Pittsburgh's outskirts. He carried no entourage, no umbrella against the drizzle that had begun to fall. He stood before a simple stone etched with his father's name. The grass around it was damp, the soil dark. He set down a single white lily, his breath clouded in the cold. He remembered his father's cough, the rasp of lungs burnt by steel dust, the way his hands never stopped trembling. He whispered nothing dramatic, only a quiet promise that the work he pursued still mattered. The night linked them, though they were apart, one tending to a fragile life, the other remembering one already gone. Days later, in the bustle of the mobile fleet trial, Eva noticed subtle changes. Cole no longer kept distance in every glance. He asked fewer questions of her notes, trusting her numbers without demanding proof at every line. He showed up at the bus yard, where old vehicles were being retrofitted, rolling up his sleeves to inspect the vinyl seats, tapping the side panels as though measuring strength with his hand. When she doubted, he said little. Instead, he picked up a wrench, tightened a loose bolt, and handed it back. Actions, not speeches. One evening, as they locked the clinic bus for the night, Eva turned to him. The street lamps cast soft halos over their breath in the cool air. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. Cole looked at her, the corners of his mouth hinting at a smile. "Neither are you." It wasn't romance yet, not even a confession, but it was a lowering of walls, a slow release of defenses. Eva felt something settle deep inside her, an understanding that trust does not arrive with declarations. It grows in ordinary moments. A plate of meatloaf, a fresh sheet tucked tight, a flower left on a grave. She walked home that night lighter than before, though the air around her seemed to thicken with unseen clouds. Headlines still whispered, donors still questioned. Somewhere, Madison and Trent were not finished. The first seed of trust had been planted, but storms were gathering. The deepest pain isn't betrayal. It's being doubted by the one you hoped believed in you. The headlines broke before dawn. Eva woke to the shrill buzz of her phone, the screen glowing with unread alerts. Harrington Foundation files leaked. Bus clinic, pilot compromised. Insider breach raises questions. She scrolled with trembling hands, the words blurring. The articles quoted unnamed sources. They displayed screenshots of FDA correspondence and internal budget drafts confidential, stamped with watermarks only visible inside the company. And there it was, buried in the middle of the story, the access trail. The records showed that the files had been downloaded under her login credentials. At 11:43 p.m., long after she'd gone home to change her mother's sheets. By 7 o'clock, her inbox was full of curt messages, HR demanding her presence, security reminding her to surrender her badge, even a clip note from a colleague: "I trusted you. Guess that was a mistake." At the office, whispers followed her through glass halls. Footsteps slowed as she passed, doors shut softly but with meaning. She kept her chin up, her knuckles white around the strap of her worn leather bag. The HR officer, polite but distant, handed her a single-page letter. Suspensions pending investigation. She was to turn in her laptop, her ID card, and refrain from contacting anyone about the case. Her throat was dry. She wanted to shout that it wasn't her, that she'd been home, that she'd never risk the very project she believed in. But the officer's eyes were glazed with procedure. He wasn't listening for truth, only recording facts. When she left the room, Cole was waiting down the hall. His expression was unreadable, his gray eyes colder than the polished steel beams framing the corridor. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, his voice, low and steady. "The evidence points to you." Her chest tightened. "You think I would do this? I don't know what to think." He paused, the silence stretching. "But I have to protect the foundation." It was worse than anger, worse than being fired. It was the flicker of doubt in the one man who had started to see her differently. She walked past him without a word, her footsteps echoing too loud in the hollow hall. That night, her mother's oxygen machine hissed in the corner of the small bedroom. Eva sat at the kitchen table, the suspension letter folded and refolded until the paper went soft at the creases. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. The mailbox clattered. She shuffled down the hallway, the tiles cool beneath her bare feet, and found a thick envelope stamped by her insurance provider. Inside, a notice due to pending investigations into fraud associated with her employer. Her mother's coverage might face review. The words blurred as her vision stung. She pressed the letter to her chest, sinking into a chair. Her mother's medication bottles sat lined on the counter, amber plastic, white caps, labels smudged from handling. Each pill was a lifeline. The thought of losing them was unbearable. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady, shallow breaths from the bedroom. Her heart clenched. She could endure whispers, humiliation, even the loss of her career. But her mother's care was different. That was the line she could not allow to break. across the city. Cole stood alone in his penthouse, the skyline glowing beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. He held the investigation report in one hand, his thumb rubbing against the corner of the pages. The logs were clear, the login matched, the timestamp aligned. Yet he remembered Eva's eyes in the diner, steady over a forkful of meatloaf. He remembered her kneeling to speak with patience at St. Bridget, her notebook balanced on her knee, her questions tender but precise. Logic whispered one story. Intuition murmured another. He could not reconcile the two. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, hard and tired. He thought of his father, who had taught him that trust is earned through sweat and proof, not sentiment. Yet his chest ached with something more complicated than data. Eva, meanwhile, sat at her desk long past midnight. Without access to the official files, she turned to her own notes. She spread the handwritten pages across the table, scribbled margins filled with patient stories, cost breakdowns, sketches of the mobile clinic routes. Her pencil scratched against paper as she began again, piecing together every number, every observation, building her own version of the project. If they shut her out, she would still find a way to fight. Her body was weary, her shoulders heavy, but her resolve sharpened. She would not let the leak define her. She would not let doubt crush the truth. The night grew colder. The street outside was empty, only the hum of a distant bus engine drifting through. She whispered to herself, steady and low, "I won't give up. Not now, not ever." The next day promised no mercy, but the decision had already been made in her heart. When all doors close, sometimes you build one out of plywood and grit. Eva Whitmore stood outside the stone steps of St. Michael's Church, her coat pulled tight against the March wind. The parish had seen better days. The paint on the windowsills had peeled, and the parking lot was cracked from winters of salt and snow. But in the corner sat what she had come for, a retired school bus, sun-faded yellow, its tires half sunk into gravel. Jonah, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a grin that carried both mischief and loyalty, slapped the side of the bus. She may not be pretty, but she'll run. With a little faith and a lot of elbow grease. Nora, a nurse Eva had met at St. Bridget, tugged her scarf tighter. "If you're serious, Eva, I'll volunteer my weekends. Vets need this more than anyone." Eva's chest tightened with gratitude. Suspended from her job, stripped of access, she could have given up. But instead, she saw this bus as a lifeline, rusty, dented, but full of possibility. They began with plywood and paint. Jonah rigged plywood partitions inside, sanding edges until they no longer splintered. Nora measured curtain fabric for privacy screens. Eva scrubbed seats, her fingers raw from bleach, until the faint smell of crayon and spilled milk gave way to the scent of lemon cleaner. On the first Saturday, the pilot project homeward began. The sign taped on the bus window read, "Free health check, veterans welcome." The first man to climb aboard was a Vietnam vet named Clarence, his back stooped, his cap embroidered with faded unit patches. He removed his jacket slowly, his breath wheezing. Nora cuffed the blood pressure monitor around his arm, explaining gently, "This tells us how hard your heart is working." Eva recorded the numbers, her pen steady, though her pulse raced. Clarence's readings were high, dangerously so. He admitted he hadn't seen a doctor in years. Eva handed him a printout with referral notes. "This is free, sir. Take it to the clinic down the street. They'll help." His eyes watered as he shook her hand. Didn't think anyone cared enough to check. By noon, a line stretched along the church parking lot. Veterans in worn coats, some leaning on canes, others carrying folders of medical discharge papers, all waiting for a chance to be seen. Inside, the bus became a world of measurement and hope. Nora pricked fingers for A1C tests, explaining the sugar in blood that warned of diabetes. She ran simple depression screenings, asking questions in a voice both gentle and unflinching. Jonah fetched coffee from the parish kitchen and fixed the heater when it sputtered. Eva logged every number, cost per patient supplies, time, fuel, pre-screen data, and post-referral outcomes. She kept meticulous notes, Knowing data was her shield and sword, but it was the letters that moved her most. Veterans wrote thank you notes on scrap paper, folded neatly, sometimes sealed with trembling hands. Thank you for seeing me as more than a file. You saved me a trip I could not afford. My wife hasn't stopped smiling since you checked my pressure. Each letter she placed in a manila envelope, thicker every week. By the third weekend, the bus groaned under weight but carried pride in every dent. Word had spread. Local bakeries sent boxes of donuts. A pharmacy donated glucometer strips. Children chalked homeward heroes on the sidewalk. Eva stood one evening outside the bus, the orange sunset bathing the peeling paint in gold. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she felt something she hadn't in weeks, purpose not tied to permission from boardrooms. Numbers proved what her heart already knew. Per patient. The cost was less than half of traditional clinics. Blood pressures dropped when veterans returned for follow-ups. Depression screenings flagged those who needed urgent care. It wasn't perfect, but it was proof. One Sunday afternoon, Clarence returned, smiling wider. Blood pressure lower. He handed her a folded piece of lined notebook paper. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, "You gave me back more than health. You gave me dignity." Eva pressed the paper to her chest, her throat tight. By the fourth week, she knew it was time. She gathered the binders filled with data, the envelope of letters, the photographs of long lines outside the bus. She printed before and after charts, each bar a story of change. As she stacked the papers on her kitchen table, the hum of her mother's oxygen machine steady behind her. Eva whispered, "This is bigger than my job. This is proof no one can erase." She zipped the binder closed, hugged it to her chest, and exhaled. The road ahead would not be smooth. The accusation still hung in the air, her name still tarnished. But she now carried something undeniable evidence written in numbers and in human gratitude. Eva turned off the kitchen light and stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. In the reflection, she saw not a secretary on suspension, but a woman holding the weight of change. She was ready to bring it into the light. Lies can lock doors, but truth keeps finding the window latch. Jonah never trusted the story the company told. A mechanic's son, he had spent too many nights rebuilding engines with parts that didn't belong, learning that every false piece left a trail if you followed the grooves. When Eva handed him a copy of her suspension notice, he studied the timestamp of the alleged file leak. Something about it felt wrong. He remembered seeing her that evening, tired but laughing faintly as she wiped grease from the bus seats. At 11:43 p.m., she had been home with her mother, not sneaking through databases. He began with the login, a cloned credential, one that mimicked her ID, but clones left fingerprints too. Jonah traced the network access logs and IP address slightly off, as if a shadow copy had slipped through. He knew someone had piggybacked her account. At the church basement, the old computer lab hummed. Jonah tapped furiously on the dusty keyboard, eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. He patched into the Wi-Fi guest logs from headquarters, a file left unsecured by oversight. Line after line of data scrolled past until he found the entry Madison Pierce device registered. Session overlapping Eva's supposed login. He leaned back, exhaling. Madison. The communications director with the perfect smile and clipped heels had been nearby during the leak. That alone was suspicious. Then came the camera feeds. Security footage archived but never cross-checked. Jonah, patient as a watchmaker, scrubbed through hours of footage until the frame froze. Madison, slipping into Trent's office after hours, her handbag oversized, her eyes darting at the corridor. Minutes later, Trent himself appeared, carrying a flash drive. Their shadows overlapped like conspirators sealing a pact. Jonah's gut twisted. He packaged the findings carefully. Screenshots of the login, snapshots from the footage, Wi-Fi overlaps highlighted in yellow. Then he sent them not to Eva, but directly to Cole Harrington and the company's legal counsel. The subject line read, "Only, you need to see this." Cole received the email at dawn. He had been awake already, staring at city lights fading into morning haze. When the alert chimed, he opened the files, his face hardening with each line. The evidence was irrefutable. Madison and Trent had conspired, using Eva's login as the mask. They had not only sabotaged the project, but aimed to destroy the one woman who had dared to challenge them. For a long time, Cole said nothing. His coffee cooled untouched beside him. Inside, guilt pressed against his ribs, guilt for having doubted Eva, for letting silence stretch when she needed his trust. By mid-morning, he summoned Madison. She entered his office with her usual poise, lipstick flawless, perfume sharp. Cole placed the printed screenshots on the table between them. His voice was low, almost too calm. "Explain this." Her eyes flickered, the first crack in her polished mask. She tried to deflect, claiming coincidence, misinterpretation, but the evidence lay heavy, undeniable. "You used her credentials. You conspired with Trent," Cole said, his tone cutting like steel. "You jeopardized this foundation, and you tried to ruin her." For the first time, Madison faltered. She reached for charm, but charm failed in the face of proof. By noon, her role was terminated. Security escorted her out, heels clicking too loud against marble floors. Rumors spread like fire in dry grass. As for Trent, Cole moved swiftly. Legal papers were filed. His name tied to financial irregularities surfaced. The truth no longer shielded by influence. Eva, meanwhile, sat at her kitchen table again, binder of Project Homeward data in her lap. When the call came, Cole's voice, steady but softer than she expected. "You've been cleared. Your access is restored. Prepare your findings. We'll need them." She closed her eyes, relief flooding her chest. The vindication wasn't only about her name. It was about the veterans who lined up outside that old bus, the community that believed in something better. Yet beneath her relief lingered something more fragile. She had been doubted, and doubt left scars. At headquarters, Cole stared out at the skyline once more, his jaw tight, his heart restless. Clearing her name wasn't enough. The damage had been public. The repair had to be public too. He began planning not a quiet memo, not a hidden correction, but a stage wide enough for the world to see the truth. A stage where the woman he had nearly cast aside would stand with undeniable strength. The mask had been ripped away from Madison and Trent. Now it was his turn to face what lay behind his own. What if the stage that branded you a fool became the place you set things right? The chandeliers of the Franklin Ballroom glittered once more. The same marble floors, the same crystal glasses, the same hush of polite laughter among the city's wealthy and watchful. Yet tonight, the air felt heavier. People remembered the scandal. They remembered the headlines, and many expected another quiet embarrassment. Cole Harrington stood at the edge of the stage, his shoulders squared, his suit tailored but unflashy. For a long moment he didn't speak. He let the silence stretch until forks paused above plates, until even the reporters lowered their pens. Then his voice carried across the hall. "The last time we gathered here, something broke trust. Tonight, I intend to repair it." A screen lit behind him. Not a glossy promotional video, but a simple bar chart, lines steady and unvarnished. Cole explained in words free of jargon. "This is Project Homeward, a pilot run from an old bus outside St. Michael's. Over 4 weekends, volunteers screened more than 100 veterans. Blood pressure, blood sugar, mental health check-ins, cost per patient, less than half of what our standard clinics require. Outcomes, stronger than projections. And the waiting list is already longer than the pilot itself." Images filled the screen, a nurse laughing with a veteran as she wrapped a cuff around his arm, handwritten thank you notes in trembling script, children chalking homeward heroes outside the bus. Gasps rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then firmer as numbers met faces. This was not abstract philanthropy. This was lives touched. Cole's tone shifted, and we must remember why this began. A man who cleans these very floors was accused wrongly of theft. That moment revealed not just a mistake, but a fracture in our values. Tonight, Mr. Daniel Price, would you join me? A stir at the back. Daniel? The janitor in his pressed work shirt walked hesitantly toward the stage. The audience parted, some whispering, some bowing their heads. When Daniel stepped under the lights, his hands trembled as Cole clasped them firmly. You never stole, but your dignity was stolen in this room. Tonight, it is returned. Applause began softly, then spread, hands rising, people standing. Cole raised his voice again. And now, let us act. I have sold my personal helicopter. Every dollar will fund new mobile clinics, and every donation given tonight, I will match. Our goal, 10 buses, reaching thousands who have been waiting too long. Reporters scribbled furiously, phones lit with pledges. Donors who had come skeptical found themselves moved, some wiping at the corners of their eyes. Then came the moment no one expected. Cole gestured toward the wings. There is one person without whom this would not exist. Someone I doubted, but who proved truth through courage and persistence. Eva Whitmore, please come forward. Eva froze for a second. The lights dazzled her eyes as she stepped onto the stage, binder still clutched in her hands. Her knees felt weak, but the applause gave her strength. Cole turned to her, his voice lower but resonant. I wronged you. I let doubt overshadow trust. Tonight, I make it clear publicly, irrevocably, you are not only cleared of every accusation, you are the reason we stand on firmer ground. He faced the audience, effective immediately. Eva Whitmore is appointed Director of Community Health Initiatives for the Harrington Foundation. She will lead Project Homeward as it grows. For a heartbeat. The hall was silent, stunned. Then the applause swelled like a wave, rolling through marble and glass. People rose to their feet. Some shouted bravo. Others simply clapped until their palms reddened. Eva's throat closed. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper to Cole. Why me? He leaned just close enough. Words meant for her alone. Because you earned it. And because the truth belongs in the light. Tears brimmed, but she steadied herself. Lifting her chin, she glanced at Daniel beside her, at the photographs of veterans, at the crowd now cheering her name. For the first time in weeks, she did not feel like a secretary scrambling to survive. She felt like a leader trusted to serve. The gala continued, champagne poured, checks written. But Eva knew the most important moment had already passed. Cole had done more than restore her reputation. He had placed his own name on the line beside hers. As the applause slowly quieted, Cole leaned toward her once more. After this, we need to talk. Away from the lights. Her heart caught. She nodded, still clapping politely with the crowd, though her thoughts already turned to the conversation waiting beyond chandeliers and cameras. The night that once humiliated her had become the night of her vindication. But the story between her and Cole was not yet finished. Not every promise needs a spotlight. Some belong to quiet water and honest air. The gala had ended hours ago, but Eva still felt the echo of applause in her chest. Her new title sounded unreal even in her own mind. Director? The word felt heavier than she expected, like a coat not yet broken in. Cole had suggested a walk instead of another toast. So they slipped away from the glowing hotel, leaving marble floors and chandeliers behind. Now they strolled side by side along the Schuylkill River. The city lights shimmered on the water, long ribbons of gold and silver broken by ripples. It was quiet except for the steady hum of cars on a distant bridge and the rhythm of their shoes on the paved path. The night smelled faintly of wet stone and early spring. Eva wrapped her coat tighter. She carried no champagne glass, no binder of data, just her own thoughts. She wondered if he felt the same lighter, yet somehow more exposed now that the noise had faded. Cole broke the silence first. You were braver than I deserved. She looked at him, surprised. Brave. I nearly collapsed walking onto that stage. You still walked. You still spoke through silence. That's what bravery is. For a moment, she let the words settle. She thought of the months of doubt, of his gray eyes turned cold in the boardroom. "You didn't believe me," she said softly. His jaw tightened, not in defense, but regret. "No, I let the numbers blind me, and for that, I can't undo the harm. But I can promise something different now." They paused by the railing, leaning over the dark water. A barge moved slowly downstream, its lights blinking red against the current. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes," Cole continued. "But I will slow down. I'll listen. I won't jump to doubt the people who've earned my trust, especially you." Eva felt the cold metal of the railing under her palms. She closed her eyes briefly, hearing the hum of water against stone. "I don't need grand speeches, Cole, just action, consistent, steady. That's what builds trust back." He nodded. "Then let it be action, not just tonight, not just until the press fades, but in every choice after." They began walking again, slower now, steps in rhythm. Street lamps cast soft circles of light, then let them fall into darkness again. Each circle felt like a small stage, but without an audience, just two figures choosing whether to step forward together. Eva spoke of her mother, of nights filled with laundry soap and oxygen hissing, of how fear had shaped her, but also how care had given her strength. Cole listened, his silence no longer heavy, but open. Then he spoke of his father, the steel mill, the cough, the quiet lessons about dignity and hard work. He admitted how ambition sometimes made him forget those lessons. "I don't want to forget anymore," he said simply. Their words were not polished. They stumbled, circled back, paused to breathe. Yet in the roughness was something more valuable than perfection. By the river bend, Cole stopped. He turned to face her fully, hands in his coat pockets, eyes steady under the lamplight. "I'm not asking for forever tonight, but I am asking for the chance to walk beside you, not as a boss, not as a benefactor, just as a man who wants to keep pace with you, no matter how long the road." Eva felt her throat tighten. No ring, no kneeling, just a sentence plain as river stone. Yet it touched deeper than any dramatic gesture could. She smiled faintly, blinking back warmth in her eyes. "Then keep walking. Cole, we'll see where the road leads." They stood together a moment longer, the city stretching out behind them, the water moving forward as it always did. When they resumed walking, neither hurried. Their footsteps blended with the whisper of the river, and though the night was still dark, Eva felt the edge of dawn inside her, a quiet brightness waiting. Some promises didn't need chandeliers or applause. They belonged here, by the river, carried on honest air. As they reached the end of the path, the horizon held a faint trace of light. A new morning was already on its way. The truest ending is not applause, but a door opening for someone who needs help. The morning air smelled of spring rain, cool and clean. Along the edge of the parking lot at St. Bridget, 10 gleaming buses stood in a neat row, their sides freshly painted with the words "Project Homeward" in bold navy letters. The engines purred softly, ready to move, ready to serve. Crowds gathered near the church steps, local families, veterans, nurses, reporters, even children holding handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Homeward." Balloons bobbed gently in the breeze. The old stone clinic, once shuttered in shame, now shone with new banners announcing its reopening. Eva Whitmore stood at the front, scissors in hand. She wore a simple dress the color of sky after rain, her mother by her side in a wheelchair, a small scarf tied neatly around her hair. The oxygen tube rested gently across her cheek, but her eyes shone bright with pride. Cole Harrington stood a step behind them, deliberately out of the spotlight. His suit was dark, but his expression was lightened by a rare ease. For once, he was not the man commanding attention. He was the man making space for someone else. A hush fell as Eva's mother lifted her hand to steady the ribbon. Eva guided the scissors, and together they cut. The ribbon fluttered to the ground, and the crowd broke into cheers. The first patient, a frail veteran with a cane, stepped slowly toward the bus. Volunteers steadied him as he climbed the short steps. Inside, the smell of sanitizer mixed with the faint sweetness of fresh paint. The medical equipment gleamed under the ceiling lights, ready for use. Outside, a food truck had set up near the curb, serving waffles dusted with powdered sugar. The smell drifted across the lot, mingling with the sharper scent of antiseptic from the clinic doors. Life, sweet and bitter, ordinary and vital, flowed together in the air. The bell of the clinic rang as the first checkup began. Applause rippled again, but softer now, less about spectacle and more about community. Eva felt her mother squeeze her hand. She turned, saw the tears in her mother's eyes, and bent low to whisper, "We did it. Mom, we really did." Her mother's smile trembled but held steady. "No, you did." Eva straightened, her gaze finding Cole. He was watching quietly, hands clasped behind his back, eyes steady on her. She walked toward him through the swell of people, and when she reached him, he took her hand. No announcement, no speech, just fingers meeting, firm and calm. In that moment, there was no need for promises. The buses, the clinic, the people waiting, those were the promises. This was what they had fought for, what they had doubted, what they had reclaimed. Cole leaned close enough for only her to hear. "This is yours. Eva. Always was." She shook her head gently. "Ours. It only works if it's ours." Their eyes held, not fiery, not desperate, but steady as river stones. They had walked through suspicion, through shadows of betrayal, through boardrooms and headlines, and now, standing beside the buses, they finally stood on even ground. Around them, the day unfolded. Children tugged at balloons. Nurses checked clipboards. A second patient mounted the steps, greeted with warm smiles, the hum of engines, the clink of coffee cups from volunteers, the laughter of neighbors all wove together into a music truer than any Gala orchestra. Eva breathed it in deeply. This was not a stage. This was a beginning. The cameras still clicked, donors still mingled, but she barely noticed. What mattered were the doors, metal doors painted white and blue that kept opening, one after another, to people who had waited too long. Her hand remained in Cole's, not as spectacle, but as anchor. They were no longer secretary and CEO, not even scandal and savior. They were two people who had chosen to believe again in each other, in the work, in the power of starting over. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shortened. The buses gleamed brighter, lined up like a small army of hope. Eva turned once more toward the crowd, raising her voice just enough. "This is only the first day. The road ahead is long, but homeward belongs to all of us. Every patient, every volunteer, every hand that gives or receives care. Thank you for believing when it was hardest." The crowd answered with applause, but gentler than before, not thunderous, but heartfelt. Cole squeezed her hand once more, and she knew without words that his promise was not in declarations, but in every step forward from here. The veteran inside the bus laughed with the nurse. The clinic bell rang again. The smell of waffles lingered on the breeze. The doors kept opening, and with each one, a new chapter began. In the end, Eva and Cole's story is not only about power, betrayal, or even redemption. It is about trust, and the quiet ways it is built. Trust is not won in boardrooms or on gala stages. It is earned in the small choices we make every day, showing up when no one expects us to, listening when it is easier to doubt, and choosing to act with honesty even when it costs us. For many of us, life has offered moments when our courage was tested, when we were judged unfairly, or when someone we cared for lost faith in us. The lesson here is that our worth is not defined by those trials, but by how we respond. We can meet suspicion with patience, betrayal with resilience, and failure with the resolve to begin again. The greatest redemption rarely comes with applause. It comes in the steady work of serving others, in the dignity of keeping promises, and in the gentle strength of forgiveness. Like Eva and Cole, we all have the chance to rebuild what was broken, sometimes with grand gestures, but more often with simple, faithful acts of love and truth. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If Eva and Cole's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, courage, and redemption. Your support helps us keep bringing these meaningful tales to life.